October 1989. Who wants to hear another Iceland story? I'm going to share an anecdote, with you. But let me know if you're actually interested in hearing about Iceland and things that went on in Iceland. This anecdote that I have today isn't about Iceland itself. It's just something that I did while I was there. Don't remember exactly when, so I'm sort of just spreading these stories out throughout the year that I was in Iceland, which is just weeks, of course, here, because, time. It's weird. So, can't say if this actually happened in October of 1989, but in the building where the radar was, for those who don't know, I was in the Air Force as a security specialist. I was stationed in Iceland. I was at Rockville, which was our radar site, and one of the buildings housed the radar, and I worked the security for that building. Is there anybody watching this new who doesn't know what's going on here? Anyway, within the radar building, there was a break room, and the vending machine, almost everything was 45 cents. And I would always, throw in a couple quarters, get my Reese's peanut butter cups, and leave the nickel change that would drop down into the little change thing. I just left it. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just that lazy that I couldn't be bothered to pick up a nickel, but I left it. And eventually, someone noticed that I always left the nickel, and they asked me why I did it. And what I told them was this, that as a child, my father had very bizarre ways of punishing myself and my siblings whenever we got in trouble. And he had this big bowl that he kept out, and anytime anyone had a nickel, they had to put it in that bowl. And whenever I got in trouble, he would make me stand in the corner with my back to the wall, or walls, technically, because it was a corner. And he'd gather everybody else in the family, and they would throw nickels at me until the bowl was empty. And so I told people from growing up to this point in my life, I refused to touch a nickel. I was just traumatized, refused to touch a nickel. That's why I always left nickels in the vending machine. Of course, this is completely fabricated. None of this happened, but the story spread. A lot of people got to know it, so I made sure if I was in front of somebody who I even suspected had heard this story, I would not touch a nickel. If I was at the PX buying something and somebody was there who had heard the story, I would tell the cashier when I was getting my change, I'd say, no nickels. You can give me pennies. I don't want any nickels. So a friend of mine, I did let a few people in on this. A friend of mine got a roll of nickels and wrote "break open in case of Eric" on the side of it. I don't know if I ever told everybody that it wasn't true. It was just a harmless little story, I think. I don't think I caused anybody damage by just making up this crazy story about why I didn't pick up my nickels from the vending machine. It's a thing I've done in the past, this sort of thing. My middle initial is L, and whenever people would ask what my middle initial stood for, I would tell them it was long shot. And of course, no one believed me, and I'd go into this whole thing about how my father was a gambler. When my mother was pregnant with me, she was told there was a chance that I would be stillborn. And when I was actually born and I was alive, my father said that it was a long shot, and they gave me that middle name. With that story, anytime, as soon as I got someone to believe it, I'd be like, nah, I'm just kidding. But anyway, when I was in Iceland, it was the nickel story. Does anybody care about this? If I'm telling anecdotes, do you just want Iceland-specific things about the country itself? Because I got something coming up. Or does this sort of thing entertain you? I don't know. Let's just get to the books. We got a good list here, I think. And we started with a book that actually, since I've been doing these, the months that I was in Iceland, I knew this book was coming up, and I just recently was wondering how soon it would pop up. So the first book that I read in October of 1989 was called Selling Water by the River by G.U. Kennett. Don't know if that's how you pronounce the name. It's a nonfiction book, and the subtitle, or whatever you want to call it, was A Manual of Zen Training. Very dry book, but very fascinating. It went over the day-to-day rituals. If you were in a Buddhist monastery, I don't know if can't say the specific type of Buddhist monastery, whether it was just a Japanese one or what, but it went over the day-to-day rituals, what you did as soon as you woke up in the morning, how you prepared your food, how you folded your napkin, and the way you ate your meals. All the little day-to-day things that you had to do just the right way, but it also had wedding rituals, funeral. Wow, I'm having a difficult time speaking clearly today. Funeral rituals. So it was very interesting. Again, very dry, but I thought it was very interesting. And I believe this is the first time that I read about the concept that of begging. Why begging is good, at least as far as Zen Buddhism goes, which was a Buddhist. I assume it works for anybody, but in this case, we're talking about Buddhists. A Buddhist beggar is generating their own good karma because by begging, they're giving other people the chance to generate good karma. They're giving you an opportunity. You're just living your life, getting some good karma, getting some bad karma. Well, you see a beggar, you're given the chance to generate a little extra good karma by giving them some money. Which is an interesting concept, and it kind of makes sense if you believe in karma. Well, I mean, it makes sense whether or not you believe in it, but the idea of it makes sense. So that was in here. That was pretty interesting. So there you go. I started off with some nonfiction. Then we jumped right into the second book of October 1989, The Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. Apparently, the Jr. was on the copy of the book that I read, because I have it written down. I don't know if he always has that on his books. So The Sirens of Titan, I got to look at my notes here. It's about Malachi Constant. He's the most despicable human being on the planet, and he's given the opportunity to travel through space, go on adventures, whatever. But of course, there's a price to pay. Something like that. I don't know. It's Kurt Vonnegut, possibly the first Vonnegut I read. I don't remember if there's been any on this list earlier. Or maybe there has. Slaughterhouse-Five. Anyway, always love Vonnegut. Good stuff, even though I don't remember the specifics of it. But it's Vonnegut. If you haven't read Vonnegut, read some Vonnegut. Next up, a fantastic book. A book I want to reread. Long title, though. It takes up 2 lines. The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat and Other Clinical Tales by Oliver Sacks. Oliver Sacks, probably best known as the author of Awakenings, which was made into a movie, I believe, with Robin Williams and Robert De Niro, I want to say. But this book, and I think it's just something I randomly picked up off the shelf because it looked interesting, is about neurological issues, I guess might be the best way to put it. Directly from the title, Oliver Sacks talks about a guy that tried to pick up his wife and put her on his head because he thought she was a hat, literally. I remember one where a guy, I think he mixed up his shoes and socks, like his brain mixed them up. He put his shoes on and then tried to put his socks on over them. And when the doctor said something to him about it, he's like, no, I'm putting my shoes on over my socks. What are you talking about? I remember it talked about, I don't remember the clinical terms for these things, but I think it might have been called alien limb syndrome, which is where a person believes one of their limbs is not one of their limbs. There was specifically, he said, they heard this thump in a patient's room, and they ran in, and the patient was on the floor. He said, what's going on? He's like, there was somebody else's leg in bed with me, and I tried to throw it out, but it was his own leg. So just talks about these cases, talks about possible causes, possible cures, or treatments at least. Just fascinating, really fascinating stuff. It's a book that I definitely want to read again. Next up, number 4, Mything Persons by Robert Asprin. This is another one of those comedy fantasies with Skeeve, the magician. In this case, his mentor, Oz, the demon, Aahz. Oz, the demon, has gone missing, and Skeeve gets together a team, and they're trying to find Oz, but they have to go to like another dimension to do it where things aren't the way they're used to. Just light comedy fantasy. Next up, Jailbird by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. What do my notes say? This is about Walter F. Starbuck, who's a bureaucrat. It follows him from Harvard to the Nixon White House. He's the, what does it say in the description I read? The least known co-conspirator in Watergate. He ends up in prison. So it's a political satire, I would say. Again, I read these in 1989. I do not remember the details. But again, it's Kurt Vonnegut. Love it. Next up, At Bertram's Hotel by Agatha Christie. This is a Ms. Marple mystery, and she goes on vacation, goes to Bertram's Hotel, and she runs into some people she knows, but then she apparently starts seeing people she thinks she knows or recognizes, like some famous people, but it's not actually them. And then there's some things are being stolen, and witnesses are like, hey, that famous person, I saw them do it, but that actual famous person has an alibi somewhere. And then the doorman's murdered. Sounds crazy for a Ms. Marple or an Agatha Christie in general, and I don't remember anything about it. Let's see, what do we have next? The Burglar Who Liked to Quote Kipling by Lawrence Block. This is a Bernie Rodenbar. And old Bernie, the thief, is hired by somebody to steal this old book that's one just super long poem. Apparently a very bad poem. He steals it. He goes to the woman who's supposed to be the in-between person. He's going to give the book to her. She'll give it to the client. Money is exchanged. But it seems like she drugs him because he wakes up in her apartment. The book is gone. She's dead. There's a gun in his hand. And he's got to clear his name. That seems to be what happens in every one of these so far. Bernie steals something or is about to steal something and ends up inadvertently or vertently framed for murder. But they're fun. Excuse me. Next up, Love and Marriage by Bill Cosby. This is the before times. We didn't know. It's comedy essays by Bill Cosby. That's it. That's all we need to say. After that, we have Glory Lane by Alan Dean Foster. And this is some human people meet some aliens at a bowling alley and learn that they are... Did I write anything down here? Nope, apparently I didn't care enough to write it down. They meet some aliens at a bowling alley and learn that they're the key to saving the universe. It's Alan Dean Foster. So generally, in my opinion, it's going to be light, fun, funny, either fantasy or science fiction. In this case, science fiction. I know he's done more than just comedy stuff. Tons of novelizations. But in this particular case, some lighthearted sci-fi. All right, next up we have Venus on the Half Shell by maybe Philip Jose Farmer. So, or is it by Kilgore Trout? Venus on the Half Shell is a book that is mentioned in a Kurt Vonnegut book, and I think it's Sirens of Titan. Somewhere in, let's just say it's Sirens of Titan. I'm 92% sure. Somewhere in there, a book called Venus on the Half Shell by Kilgore Trout is mentioned. I don't remember how much of the plot is talked about in the Vonnegut book, Sirens of Titan, if that's what it is. Eventually, this book, Venus on the Half Shell by Kilgore Trout, came out in the real world. And the first editions said by Kilgore Trout. And I recall, at least in my experience for a long time, it was believed that Philip Jose Farmer was the author, but no one was 100% sure. I mean, obviously, Philip Jose Farmer was 100% sure, and probably his agent and those. But in general, people weren't 100% sure. But if you go on Amazon now, you can only find it by, well, unless you're buying a super used copy. Like the new copies are by Philip Jose Farmer. But anyway, so Philip Jose Farmer wrote this book based on what was in the Kurt Vonnegut book, Sirens of Titan. Long-winded there. But it's about Simon Wagstaff, and I did not write anything else down. So, he survives, possibly the only survivor? I don't know. He survives a biblical-style flood. He's not Noah times. Modern day, possibly even in the future. But there's a deluge, destroys the world, but he finds a spaceship and takes off and goes into space and has adventures. I recall not being super impressed with this, and it's possible it's because it's not at all, I don't think it's at all like a Kurt Vonnegut book. And there was talk at the time that Vonnegut wrote it himself. I don't know. It's another one I may have to go back and try again. Although I've read a few Philip Jose Farmers and not a big fan of him. So maybe it's just his writing style. But anyway, Venus on the Half Shell, Philip Jose Farmer. It is a very cool thing, if you're a Vonnegut fan, to at least read this. And I would, if I find a not too expensive copy of the original with Kilgore Trout's name on it, I would pick it up. It'd just be cool to have. All right, next up we have Mission Earth Volume 6, Death Quest by L. Ron Hubbard. Number 6 out of 10. So Jethro Heller, our alien would-be conqueror of Earth, is on the run with his girlfriend, Countess Crack, his alien opponent, who doesn't like the way this guy doesn't, Griss, I think his name is, doesn't like the way Jethro Heller is doing things, doesn't want him to get any glory for taking over Earth. So he's, his adversary, and he's sending killers after Countess Crack. So Jethro Heller's just trying to keep her alive. He's on the run. But it's crazy sci-fi comedy, political commentary, perhaps. I wasn't thinking in those terms when I read it. Didn't know anything about Scientology, so I don't know if it ties into that. But I just remember I think these were fun. All right, we're almost at the end. Next, we have At Wit's End by Irma Bombeck. This is just a book of funny essays. Back in the day before internet people were writing their comedy books, we had journalists. Would they be considered journalists? People that wrote funny essays, and then they would be put together in a book, or sometimes they just made a book of all new funny essays. But anyway, that's what this is, funny essays. What are you going to do? All right, the penultimate book, Cold Chills by Robert Bloch, of course, Psycho fame. And this is just a book of short stories by Robert Bloch. You can't go wrong. I don't remember any of the stories that were in it. And finally, the last book in October of 1989 is Terra, with an exclamation point, by Stefano Benni. This is comedy science fiction. After the people are living in a nuclear winter after 6 atomic wars, and finally a bunch of very different people from all the superpowers get together on a spaceship to try to find the mythical, legendary planet Terra, which could be the new Earth. But this is a science fiction comedy in the vein, I suppose, of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's originally in Italian. I did not read it in Italian, but when I looked it up on Amazon, first thing that comes up is the Italian edition. And then the Audible book, I think, was in Italian. There was also a French copy. I don't know if I even came across an English copy anywhere. I didn't look through every copy they had on Amazon. Don't really remember much about this. I do like sci-fi comedy generally, so I may or may not have enjoyed it. Sometimes translations don't work through no fault of the author, so I don't know. Don't remember. But that was the last book I read in October of 1989. Closing up my little notebook. We have got a long way to go. This thing takes us to 2004, and then I have a spiral bound that I'm still writing in today. Right, so there you have it. That's the stuff I read in October of 1989. So if you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put them in the comments down below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. We try to be polite here on my channel. Let me know if you care about stories from Iceland, or if I should just talk about the books. How much detail do you want about the books? Do you just want to hear the list? Or do you want to hear my rambling about what the book is about and circumstances and things? I don't know. Just give me some feedback, folks. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you want to follow me on other social media, my Twitter is @Ronin5757. My Instagram, where I post pictures of books, comics, board games, and fuzzy animals, is Eric Smith 5757. That's Eric with K, ERIKSMITH 5757. And that's all I've got. So until next time, read more books.